Hey there. So, it's kind of part two, part three, whatever, intro, part one and two. There was a particular claim. Actually, the first annoying claim for me was one about homosexuality being the worst thing ever. Um, that that claim was made in the video this is a response to. That doesn't actually happen in the Bible. That's never said. It is listed as a sin. That's fair game. It's never listed as the worst sin, and in fact, there aren't really hierarchies of sins listed in the Bible. There are hierarchies of punishments and of consequences and things like that to various sins. Obviously, murder is considered quite a lot worse than, say, telling a lie in terms of its repercussions. But it's not really the same thing as saying that this is worse than that. There are commandments that are in order. Obviously, your first commandment is, of course, that Yahweh is your God. And He alone you will worship. That from that will fall many things, including not murdering, not lying, honoring your parents, and so on. But no, there is nowhere in the entire. I've read it for the whole thing. Crazy, I know it's really long. It's not that bad, really. Read the whole Bible. Doesn't actually say that it's the worst thing ever. Doesn't actually say it's worse than any other particular sin, frankly. So. It kind of comes from this idea that, to follow with that, there's this idea that she's saying, well, there's the Bible says those things, and then there's things about incest and slavery and all these other different, problems in the Bible and these bad things that the Bible supposedly advocates, and genocide I've seen thrown out there a lot. And she follows this up with saying, but then Christians don't really deal with that. They just kind of ignore it and then point out, well, the Bible has other good things, too. And she says we cherry pick and so on. I don't know what Christians she's talking about, other than possibly pop culture, nominal, angels look like people but have bird wings, people become angels kinds of Christians. Like, just the absolute bare minimum, highly inaccurate, non-pastoral, non-scientific research, non-historical research, non-philosophically based, non-exegetical kinds of Christians. I guess that's who she's talking about when she says, and Christians don't respond to these things, because there are tons of resources out there and entire campuses who have devoted hours to writing entire books on doing nothing but answering alleged contradictions in the Bible. Unless you're talking about contradictions and bad things in the Bible, like in Judges, it may say that a particular king had 40,000 horsemen, and in First Kings or Chronicles or some such, it may say that he had 400,000. Well, it's not really a contradiction in the original text per se. It's a contradiction in probably due to a scribal error. That happens. Printing presses hadn't been invented, and even on computers, if I try to type my own paper that I've written myself, again, on a computer while reading the original source material, I'm still going to have a typo in there somewhere. Now, most typos are fairly obvious and they get fixed. Some typos are less obvious. And especially numerical typos, and especially if you knew how Hebrew numbers worked, they're really easy to mess up. Those kind of things do exist because of scribal errors. No one ever said that the copies of the Bible were all perfect. It's the message of the Bible that is perfect. You absolutely can't have a scribal error in there somewhere. Be that as it may, kind of nitpicking on that one. Yes, there are people who deal with these issues in the Bible, and as far as white Christians to interact with, on most of those and up to and including the genocide ones and other allegedly immoral contradictions and so forth. Christian Apologetics Research Ministry don't really like Matt Slick that terribly much for his... It's kind of rude, honestly. I don't mean to slander the guy, but he is kind of rude in my opinion. I think he's rude. But most, not all of his answers are very coherent and cogent and applicable, and so that website's pretty good. CARM.org. Don't go to the forums. It's a slop in there. I am addicted to arguing with people on it, but don't. And I'm not saying that it's immoral to be on the forums, but if you like being happy, it's not a good place for you. That having been said, the second issue in this video, which will probably take at least as much time as the first, is the idea that there was an allegation that hell is not mentioned in the Old Testament, and it is. Kind of. What you have to understand is that New or Old Testament, both, really talk about the afterlife in exactly the same terms, but in two different languages, and that matters. And we kind of muddle it up because we translate those languages a little oddly. English uses the word hell from a Germanic kind of term that means basically the same thing, but the word hell is nowhere to be found anywhere in the entirety of the Old or New Testament in any language, until you translate it to like a tertiary language like German or some such, or English or French. It was written primarily in Hebrew and Greek. Just a little bit of Latinism in there every once in a while. There's some Aramaic and a little Egyptian, whatever. Most of it Hebrew and Greek. And in Hebrew, the word was Sheol, and in Greek the word is Hades, or Hades. I don't like modern pronunciation of Greek or even classical pronunciation. I only know Koine pronunciation, standard Koine pronunciation. And that's what I prefer to call everything, be that as it may. Sheol is the land of the dead. Hades, land of the dead. Okay? If you know your Greek mythology, you know that Hades was the overarching label for the land of the dead. It's just where dead people are. It's the grave, it's the land of the dead, it's the underworld, etc., etc. It was divided between, even in Greek mythology, between Tartarus, the bad place where the bad people have gone, and the Elysian Fields, where the good people went and enjoyed ambrosia or whatever the idea was at any given time. It changed a little bit here and there. But the idea was good people over here, bad people over here. The word Hades is more often than not, especially in the King James, translated as hell. There are other words that are translated as hell, including Gehenna and a few others. But by and large, Hades is sometimes properly translated as hell in terms of it's the bad place. In other terms, it is improperly translated as hell because it's just talking about the land of the dead. Sheol, same thing. Again, in English Bibles. They're getting better at this more often than not. And King James onlyists give people a lot of flack for this for no good reason because they don't know anything about Hebrew and Greek. Frankly, I'll put that out there right now. No King James onlyist can read Hebrew and Greek right off the bat. I've never met one at all. They can't even read the alphabet of it most of the time. But Sheol, same thing. Overarching idea, grave, pit, whatever, land of the dead, underworld. Okay. Bad place, prison, is referenced. There are many different references to people in Sheol, where worms are eating them and they're dying, and it's terrible. This happens all the time in the Old Testament, especially the Psalms, because the Psalms is really big on using powerful, really inflammatory language. If we wrote the Psalms today with the same kind of emphasis, linguistic emphasis, it'd have a lot of swearing in it, and people don't like that idea that I would even suggest such a thing, but it would. It uses often either the most beautiful of language or the harshest, most ugly language possible to describe things, up to and including certain people going to Sheol and being consumed by worms and everything's being awful for them. And this is clearly an idea of the prison. In ancient Palestine, the idea was, like in ancient Greece and most theistic cultures that believed in an afterlife of any kind, believed that there was a bad place and a good place, and between them there was a gulf, a chasm, an abyss that you could not cross. And over here, again, bad people, over here, good people. And we just call the bad place hell now for any number of linguistic reasons. It doesn't matter why. And the good place we usually call heaven, but they didn't really call it that so much as Abraham's bosom or any number of other terms. They just call it Sheol if they're referencing one or the other or both. Didn't really make any difference. You would understand by the context, because Hebrew is a very contextual language, and the people are talking in a very contextualized way, which place they were talking about. And there is a little bit of progressive revelation. I'm not going to say that all of the idea of what, the bad place and the good place were is totally fleshed out. It still isn't. I know a lot of people that think that New Jerusalem they confuse with heaven, and it shouldn't. New Jerusalem is on the physical earth in the future, and all of that they're talked about as the same kind of thing. And pop culture Christianity would have you believe that heaven, because it's heavens and it's heavenly, there's clouds and just bright rays of sunshine all the time, and there is no description like that anywhere in the Bible at all, anywhere, period. It just doesn't exist of it. And so that's the case there. So no, hell is in the Old Testament, kind of. The place is thought of, it is talked about, it is just not named as such. They didn't differentiate as clearly as we would now, but contextually you can understand that is in fact what they're talking about. They're talking about there is a place where the horrible evil people that were murderers and cutthroats and bandits and liars and people that oppressed people and so on would go when they died, and then there's the saintly, God-worshipping, good people who would go and be on the other side of the chasm where it's still kind of nice, and they're just sort of waiting for their chance to actually be with Yahweh. And so these two ideas were in fact taught long in the Old Testament, long into those times, long before those times. I don't have any academic sources to really link to on that, but if fix really comes to it, I can probably find some. It won't really be all that hard. But, there's that. Again, this whole thing kind of smacks to me of didn't really do any research, doesn't really know what you're talking about when you're making all these assertions, and you really shouldn't do that. I don't go around making assertions about Islam, other than the most obvious ones. Muhammad is their primary prophet. This is common knowledge. I'll do that. Alright? Am I going to make assertions about Islam like, how old people were when they said various things, or his life is a parallel of somebody else's life, or, whatever? No, I'm not going to do that. Not unless I've actually researched it. And I've researched probably more about Islam than most non-Muslim people. And I have a Muslim friend, and from time to time we have conversations, and they're lovely, and I love them. It's great. He's a great guy. I love talking to him about that stuff. And making fun of movies. But no, as a rule, I don't accuse Islam of being wrong in hearsay kinds of ways. Now, when I was a teenager, I might have, but teenagers generally going to do stupid things anyway. Sorry for what I've done on that, but I wouldn't put that out there in the public sphere because that would be really easy to debunk, kind of like this is really easy to debunk. You shouldn't do that. Basically, if you don't know what you're talking about, don't speak, is all I'm getting to. And what I hope to actually accomplish by this is to sort of cause the person I'm responding to You know what? Don't even read the Bible if you don't really want to. If you don't believe it, fine. I don't care. Like, I do a little bit. I care in the general sense, but I don't necessarily think you need to become a Christian. But if you're not going to become a Christian, and if you're going to talk badly about things in Christianity, you might want to know a little more about it properly from academic sources and pastoral sources and language, meanings and how things are translated and so forth, because that means you actually know what you're talking about. And very few people do that and then continue to actually bash the religion. But anyway, this is too long, so I'll cut it off.